The next 3 modules are based on Renee's story. We met Renee earlier in this course. Through Renee and some members of her support team, we'll illustrate and explore the CTI approach, using its application in the PSH programs in Wayne County as an example. There are 2 primary staff roles in the PSH programs in the Detroit-Wayne system: housing specialists and peer specialists. Housing specialists are trained and knowledgeable about the ins and outs of planning for, finding, securing, and financing housing for individuals with behavioral health challenges. The peer specialists have also been trained in PSH, and most have training and/or certification in peer support. They are the feet-on-the-ground linchpin for much of the day-to-day support activity and survival strategies in PSH. Together, they provide intensive support to help a person make a successful transition to regular housing. They offer ongoing support to help with the adjustment period and eviction prevention. Let's look at the phases of CTI as they apply to PSH. Here are the 4 phases of CTI as applied in PSH. They are distinct with specific tasks in each phase: person-centered, individual planning and referral for housing assistance, engagement and initial planning, transition and trying it out, ongoing support, and permanency. Through the rest of this course, we'll illustrate each phase through Renee's story and explore it in some depth. Let's meet Jackie, Renee's case manager. You may recognize some of her concerns.
I'm Jackie, Renee's case manager. When Renee first talked to me about moving out of the AFC and getting a place of her own, I was worried. She was just beginning to get on her feet, and the AFC placement seemed like the best place for her to stay. She's safe, goes to her programs, and seems to be settled in well. Besides, the realities of Renee getting her own place seem huge. She has only SSDI, and her family is not particularly supportive. She has a history of trauma, so feeling safe and having support where she lives is important. On top of that, my caseload is heavy, and I just don't have time to do all the footwork it would take.
In 1999, the Supreme Court found that unnecessary institutionalization constitutes discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. This ruling is commonly known as Olmstead decision. Over the past decade, this ruling has been implemented unevenly across the United States. However, with new 2013 guidance and stronger mandates for implementation of the Olmstead decision, now any entity receiving any funds from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, behavioral health agencies, housing providers, community developers, must provide housing for people with disabilities in the most integrated setting appropriate for their needs. Integrated setting is defined here as those that provide people with opportunities to live, work, and receive services in the greater community, like individuals without disabilities. No segregation. People with disabilities live in the same settings as those without disabilities. People interact with people without disabilities. Yes, this is written in stone. Michigan is taking this seriously. There are new state Olmstead compliance regulations that require providers to offer services and supports that enable people to live successfully in the community. Access to community living is required for all people receiving services. Community living does not mean living in a licensed facility such as an AFC home. There is renewed push to assure choice and to help individuals move out of such settings and live in more integrated community settings. In practical terms, this means that behavioral health providers in Michigan are legally and contractually required to ensure that all people served by an agency have a housing needs assessment at intake and at least annually. The housing assessment must explore personal preferences and include a process for helping individuals make informed choices about where and with whom to live. Each person's housing preferences and needs must be documented and addressed in their person-centered Individual Plan of Service, IPOS. No one should have as their only choice to live in a restrictive setting such as a licensed AFC. Any restrictive living placement must be supported by a clear written justification that includes a specified time limit. Let's return to Renee's story. Jackie, her case manager, is nervous about supporting Renee's desire to move into her own place, but she knows by law she must take this request very seriously.
But Renee wasn't giving up. She really wanted a place of her own. She felt this was the next important step in her recovery, though I was still not 100% convinced it was the right thing to do at this time. The law says I need to look into it seriously. Every person served must have a housing needs assessment at least annually. Together, Renee and I talked through her housing needs and wants. We formed a goal for making a housing change and a time frame for making the change. My next step was to adjust Renee's IPOS to incorporate the new goal. Renee and I affirmed her Social Security and Medicaid status and checked to see what might be needed for this move. Renee agreed to get a health checkup to make sure she had any needed health support in a new place. I made an appointment with the doctor for her. Renee has some credit issues and definitely needs help to find a suitable place and figure out how to pay for it. Renee and I decided to refer her to a permanent supportive housing specialist. I sent a referral to PSH that outlined some of her needs as I saw them and outlined her goals. They will help her develop a housing plan for the transition and later for in-home support. I'll work with the PSH housing specialist to incorporate those activities into her IPOS.
The steps that Jackie undertook are not only good clinical practice, but also help her keep her practice and her agency in compliance with the Olmstead decision and Michigan state policies. Her basic assessment steps included developing an understanding of where Renee wanted to live and her housing goals, considering her support needs and currently available resources, making a referral for a general health check, and updating the IPOS to reflect these needs and directions. PSH staff can be an important resource for both case managers and agency clients. When PSH is not available, the case manager can use CTI principles to help a person make a good transition and help comply with the Olmstead decision. Jackie was able to refer Renee to PSH. The housing staff will meet with Renee and get to know her. They will not repeat the case management housing assessment. They will explore some areas mentioned in much greater detail. For example, they will look at her specific housing preferences as well as her resources and needs very carefully. In some cases, they may work with the case manager to help a person apply for SSI or other basic entitlements if they are not already in place. They often help individuals apply for new resources such as housing income assistance. They will work with the case manager and individual, and often others, to create a transition plan. Housing staff can help find possible apartments, complete applications, negotiate leases and fees, help to resolve barriers such as bad credit, reasonable accommodation requests, and help access resources needed for move-in. Housing staff work with case managers to assure that service referrals are made, notices are given, and that appropriate entitlements and benefits are received. They can also be the essential link to resolving the worries of key people in a person's life. This engagement and planning period is typically around 3 months, but sometimes longer or shorter depending on the individual's circumstances. Bottom line, in all these activities, the person is the center of everything. Concerted effort is made not to do things for the person, but with the person, shoulder to shoulder. Plans and activities are centered on the individual's wants and needs. All this activity is transparent and collaborative. The person is actively involved every step of the way. Let's hear about Renee's experience meeting with the housing specialist, Angela.
I met with Angela, a housing specialist. We hit it off right away. I felt she understood me and where I was coming from. We talked a lot about what was important to me. She asked questions about what I did for fun, the kinds of resources and supports I rely on, the kind of place I wanted to live in, and whether I wanted a housemate. I told her that I like pink. I have a brother who lives across town and that I dream of adopting a little dog. I have a good friend at the clubhouse, Tom, and wondered if he could be a housemate. She said there was nothing wrong with exploring the idea. Having a housemate can sometimes make a place affordable. We also talked about my resources.
Here is an example of an assessment often used in PSH programs. It is a tool for structuring conversations about preferences. This is a very abbreviated example, but it shows Renee's answers to some of the questions. You can see how this discussion can guide both Renee and the housing specialist when thinking about the kinds of supports and activities that may be needed to help Renee find, get, and keep her own place. The idea is to have a conversation just exploring preferences, not options at this point, just hopes, dreams, and desires. Home is such an important part of identity, and these factors matter. Some things are more or less important than others. This is captured in the importance column. When a living situation violates a very important, especially non-negotiable need, no stairs for example, the likelihood of long-term stability in that setting is reduced. Completing a document like this sets the stage for making trade-offs later. For example, Renee may need to make a trade-off between a place with stairs and her desire for a pet. You'll find a more complete example in the resources section of this course. Other topics to be found there that can be explored include security and safety, alcohol or drugs. Some people want strong sobriety support, neighborhood characteristics, proximity to family, affordability, and whether or not to live with others. Jackie also used this social network tool to better understand Renee's current support network. Who is in her life right now? Who might be able to become a more active part of her life? You can see that Renee has a handful of people in her life right now. This tool can help Angela and Renee think about ways to broaden her support network. This is a very simple tool that can be a helpful component of any assessment or planning process. You'll find it in the resource section of this course. Briefly, the individual puts themselves in the center and then plots each person in their life. The closer they feel to the other person, the closer they write that person's name to their own. People who are there but not close are written further away. There are categories offered to stimulate everyone's thinking, but these can be adjusted to suit individual circumstances. However, work, family, friends, professionals, and community acquaintances are common. And these days, some people need a category for their online life too. Many people feel connected to others they do not see but communicate with in the virtual world. These may be important connections. Part of service planning can be to identify one change that could be made in a person's map. For example, Renee's brother Bobby is pretty distant from her. What would it take to move him a bit closer? He doesn't have to be right in the center, but can be a slightly larger part of her life. Let's meet Renee's housing specialist, Angela. She's been working with Renee to get to know her and using a variety of tools like those we've just seen to help her learn about Renee's life and preferences. Let's hear what's on her mind.
I'm Angela, a housing specialist. After talking with Renee and her case manager, I began working on a transition plan with Renee. We looked at her finances. She had some financial problems in the past and now receives $800 monthly in Social Security disability income. In Detroit, the 2013 HUD fair market rent for an efficiency apartment is $495. At 30% of her income, her share of rent would be about $240, about half. A housemate might help, but the fair market rate for a two-bedroom goes up to $821. She can apply for a subsidized apartment from the housing authority, but there is usually a long wait. She needs a bridge. Coming from a restrictive setting like an AFC home, she will be eligible for one-time Medicaid-funded housing assistance and possibly interim assistance if she meets the requirements. She and I need to talk over the pros and cons of her options.
One of the things Angela is trying to work out is the various financial implications of different housing configurations. With a housemate, no housemate, what kind of place might be most affordable? She wants to discuss all this with Renee so that she can think about her options with facts in mind. Here's an example of a tool that Angela will be using to help her and Renee identify and then compare the costs of different living situations. This tool is also in the resource section of your course. The tool has columns to enter information for housing option 1, 2, and 3. The cost could include application fees, deposits, report fees, rent for the first month. Not all options require each of these fees, but it's better to check them out than to be surprised. There's also a space for other fees which might be incurred. For example, telephone is not listed in the utilities column, but many people may want or need to set up telephone as part of the cost of moving in. There's also a column for non-Medicaid assistance. This may be some support from a parent or sibling against costs, a subsidy from a utility company or housing assistance program. For some people on Medicaid and living in AFC homes, Michigan offers a one-time assistance program to help defray some of these setup costs. Information about this resource is available from a PSH housing specialist. Please note this is not a budget or spending plan. It is simply a tool to identify and compare apples to apples, the costs of different housing options. Deciding whether or not to live with another person can be an important decision. As we've learned, sharing a place with her friend Tom has been on Renee's mind. Housemates can help share housing costs and provide companionship. They can also bring tension because of lifestyle differences and challenges to privacy. While housemates are an important consideration when it comes to affordability, there are also trade-offs, as each of us personally understands. Weighing or making a decision about these trade-offs is not the worker's or agency's role. This responsibility lies with the individual. But it is helpful for them to have support and guidance to think it through. Also in your resources is a tool to help people weigh the upsides and downsides of having a housemate. Angela has used multiple tools to help her and Renee have important conversations about her housing goals and situation. These tools have helped Renee make practical and informed decisions based on not only her desires, but also on facts. Note how this work has been done collaboratively by Renee and Angela, shoulder to shoulder. Let's hear more from Renee about her decisions and next steps.
I decided to aim for an efficiency apartment alone to start. Maybe Tom and I can live in the same neighborhood. Angela and I went to 2 housing authorities to apply for housing vouchers. She is working with my case manager and me to apply for one-time Medicaid funding to help me out with rent and to set up costs while I wait for my voucher. I'm going to look at housing websites on the computer to learn about rent costs in different neighborhoods. In a couple weeks, we'll go look at some places together.
Angela and Renee are making a transition plan to lay out the steps and activities involved in finding and then transitioning into a new place. Here's an example of how a person-centered housing transition plan can be structured. This example is based on a 4-month planning and preparation process culminating with the move-in day, though some transitions may be quicker or slower. Of course, this plan is for the pre-move period. A support plan would be determined for after the move. This form is also in the resource section of your course. Note that each month has a focus. 4 months before the planned move, preparatory thinking about whether or not to move and what it would take to be successful takes place. In the 3rd month, activities include researching available housing options, costs and resource issues, possible financial support resources, and eligibility. In the 2nd month before the move, we explore options and look at places, then make decisions about which places best fit preferences and budget. Then we submit applications. And lastly, the month before the move, it's time for preparing for the actual moving in, getting stuff, arranging utility setups, planning moving day logistics, and so forth. This example begins about 4 months away from the actual move date, but the structure can be adapted to longer or shorter pre-move transition periods. The idea is to work backwards from the goal, keep the person part of the planning discussions, and keep things from becoming overwhelming. The responsibilities are noted and divided. The individual has tasks to undertake, but there are also helpers. This view shows only one helper, but there could be multiple ones, including service providers, PSH staff, friends, family, and so on. If needed to keep things focused and manageable, some people may benefit from a similar format breaking the last month into weeks and the last week into days. Many people benefit from a brief chart outlining plans for moving day, first night, and the next couple of days as well. This kind of structure can be reassuring and supportive for many people, and still others are comfortable without it. Renee and Angela have begun to look at apartments. Nothing is perfect, of course, and Renee got tired of the process. Let's hear the story from Renee.
In one place, I could have a small dog, but had to walk upstairs. In another, there was an elevator, but I could not have a dog. Another was too far from a bus line, and I wouldn't feel safe walking home alone. No pink bedrooms anywhere. But Angela said there might be other ways to have pink in my room. After a while, I got tired and decided anything was okay. But Angela had a worksheet that helped me look at the pros and cons of each place. She encouraged me to think about the different neighborhoods and what they had to offer, like grocery stores and laundromats. Was it important to have church of my faith nearby? She took time, was patient, and helped me make a decision.
Making trade-offs can be challenging, but is part of the process. Rarely is there a place that totally meets all the person's needs and expectations. Here's the housing specialist's perspective on Renee's situation.
Renee had a hard time deciding about apartments. She was pretty overwhelmed by the process and the fact that she had to make trade-offs. Despite wanting her own place, I think she is also scared of moving. It's a big leap. I completed paperwork for one-time Medicaid assistance, including deposit fees. I set up a meeting for Renee and me to meet the landlord, review the lease, put down the deposit, and handle other details. I reminded Renee to give the AFC home a 30-day notice on her departure and to check on the return of her move-in deposit. I also called her case manager to update her on everything and make sure the IPOS is approved by the MCPN. Then we focused on the next part of the plan, preparing for the move.
Because Renee is a Medicaid beneficiary, she is eligible for Michigan's one-time Medicaid assistance program. Housing specialists understand this program and are experienced in helping people to access the resource. After Renee decided on a place, Angela completed an application similar to this example for Renee. Here's a shortened example of the application form. Only the top and bottom portions show on your screen, but the full form is available in the resource section of your course. Note that the form asks for the same kind of information we saw on the housing option comparison tool we discussed earlier, but here we're focusing on only one place, not three. The application for one-time assistance is completed and submitted only after the person has decided on their desired place and has been accepted. The form asks for real-time costs for this specific place, utilities, household setup, and moving expenses. It also asks for how many resources may be available from other sources, including the individual and his or her family. The bottom of the form asks for total costs, the difference between estimated costs and the available resources. This difference would be the amount of the request for one-time assistance. The Detroit-Wayne County Community Mental Health Authority has created policy guidance that helps define and differentiate the roles of key members of the CTI PSH team. You see here the roles of the engagement and planning phase. We will be looking at these roles for each of the remaining phases of the process as well. The full document is available in the resource section of this course. The case manager's job includes working with the person's individual plan of service, documenting the desire to move, and making revisions to the plan to enable the transition. The case manager identifies needs, services, and resources and links those to the IPOS. They also identify in the plan other team member responsibilities for performing needed tasks. The case manager ensures that appropriate benefits are applied for and is responsible to make sure the previous landlord or service provider receives termination notice according to any existing rental agreement. The housing specialist is responsible for outreach and engagement, facilitating and coordinating efforts to help broaden the individual's support network of people and resources. They may help the person pursue needed housing benefits or entitlements, often accompanying the person to meetings and assisting with applications. The housing specialist coordinates with the case manager to develop and implement the support activities outlined in the IPOS related to supported housing, and may help with landlord negotiations, advocacy, and if needed, help the person access legal assistance. The peer support specialist offers much of the day-to-day engagement and support activities in the IPOS, working with the housing specialist to help the person locate housing options. They provide a great deal of peer coaching and stay in close communication with the team. The primary role of the MCPN is to authorize the reimbursable and needed services outlined in the IPOS. We are coming to the end of the engagement and planning phase. Renee is getting close to moving into her new place. Let's take a moment and review some of the key points to remember from this section. The person is the center of everything we do in CTI and PSH. Engagement is about meeting the person where they are physically and emotionally. This means being realistic about the person's challenges, but not being limited by them. All assessment and planning activities are conversational, and various tools and worksheets can help provide structure and stimulate discussion. Of course, all tools and forms are done collaboratively and transparently. The case manager and the housing specialist are partners in helping a person plan a move to regular housing. Engagement and transition planning starts as early as possible, ideally 3 to 4 months before a move. A practical transition plan is designed to provide structure and keep things from becoming overwhelming for anyone. The process is pegged to the person's situation and allows for gradual change. Some people are eligible for one-time Medicaid funding to help with bridge financing. The application for this funding is submitted after a place is decided upon.